They're here to talk about everything that is happening in the world. Former Secretary of State Antony Blinken is here. Good morning to you, sir.
Andrew, good to see you.
We're all trying to make a sense of a whole bunch of things, but let me start with Venezuela, because that's something that you had talked about when you were in the administration. That's something that you're watching now. And just since this is the first time we've talked since we took Maduro out, I'm curious what your reaction unto itself was of that.
Well, look, Andrew, as a military matter, as an intelligence feat, you couldn't help but admire it. It was an incredible operation. So tactically, a great success. The real question is strategically, to what end and where does this end? And what is this really about? You know, at first we were told it's about the drugs, but that's clearly not the case. The fact is that most of the drugs coming out of Venezuela were going to Europe. The fentanyl that's killing so many Americans is coming from other places. The guy responsible for far more drugs coming to the United States than the Venezuelan regime, Hernandez, the former president of Honduras, was released from jail by this administration, which is a big mistake. So it's not about that. Is it about restoring democracy? Maybe, and I hope so, except that so far President Trump's been dismissive of Maria Corina Machado, the opposition leader. Her stand-in in the last election got somewhere between 65 and 70% of the vote. Now, apparently the president's supposed to meet with her. That's a really good thing, and I hope we can get onto that democratic transition. So is it about the oil? Maybe, and over time, maybe that plays out well. But we heard the oil execs last week. One of them said, right now at least, Venezuela is uninvestable. The security situation, the economic situation, the fact that with oil at $60 a barrel, it makes Venezuelan oil really expensive to produce, means that that's going to take some doing. So I think the key thing is to try to take advantage of the fact that Maduro is gone, which in and of itself is a great thing. He is one of the worst thugs. But we've had regime change without changing the regime. The same regime is still in place. The question is, what are we going to do? Are we going to move to a democratic transition so that the people can actually get the representation they deserve?
Mr. Secretary, when you were in office with President Biden, was there ever a moment at which you considered or even put together plans to do something similar to what's just happened?
Not that I can remember, not that I can think of. We were very supportive of the opposition. We were very supportive of Mrs. Machado. We worked to bolster their efforts to be recognized. And in fact, President Biden recognized Edmundo Gonzalez as the legitimate president of Venezuela after the last election in 2024, right, when, again, he won between 65 and 70% of the vote but wasn't seated. But the problem with the military operation is not the operation itself. Again, brilliant. But where do you go now? And now, the old Pottery Barn rule that Colin Powell had, you break it, you own it. Well, now we own it. And what are we going to do with it?
Mr. Secretary, there's sort of two views of the world on this. Maybe it's a Rorschach test. There is the upside view of all this, which is if you control or at least have a different regime in Venezuela, perhaps it actually gives you some kind of leverage as it relates to Russia, potentially gives you leverage as it relates to China, potentially even gives you leverage as it relates to Canada, of all things, as it relates to oil prices and the like. The flip side is a critical view, which suggests that this opens up the opportunity for a country like China to go invade Taiwan, or gives license to Russia to continue its war with Ukraine. Where do you land there?
Andrew, it's a little bit of both. Look, for sure, the message to would-be aggressors to kind of twist what we've done to their own ends, to their own purposes, to justify their own aggression, whether it's China and Taiwan, whether it's Russia and Ukraine, that's real. At the same time, whether this is having some effect in helping to push China or push Russian influence out, undermining the Cuban regime, that could be very beneficial. But what I'm more worried about is the larger story this seems to be telling, which is that we've gone from, in effect, being the leader of the Western world to being the hegemon in the Western Hemisphere. And we're pulling back. We're actually retreating when it comes to China, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to dealing with the challenges that they pose. And as you know, and there's been a lot of discussion about this, the president, the administration is focused on this spheres of influence strategy, where the big guys, and I mean guys, in each of their respective areas get to do what they want in those areas. The Russians, the Chinese, the United States. The strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must. The problem with that is we've been there before. And we know when the world was organized that way, it didn't lead to peace. It led to conflict. The hegemons always want more. They're trying to grab more. The weak in each of these regions try to get strong, and they band together, they make alliances to take on the hegemon. If you're dealing with autocratic hegemons like a Russia or China, they won't simply live and let live when it comes to the United States, because if democracies are succeeding, that sends a bad message to their people. So they're going to keep interfering in what we do. It's a long way of saying that this retreat into a spheres of influence world, I think, actually leads to conflict, to confrontation. That's the danger we face.
Mr. Secretary, I saw a piece last week, and it was actually referencing Venezuela in light of Western Europe. And the title of it is from Real Clear Politics. Venezuela exposes Western Europe's procedural reflex. And the point was that, it goes on to say, Operation Absolute Resolve was a demonstration of Trump's capability, restraint, and willingness to act on behalf of the American people, bringing evil to justice. It was also a reminder of something increasingly uncomfortable for Europe. When confronted with real evil that directly threatens the safety of its citizens, the U.S. is willing to act decisively instead of surrendering to constructs of international law. And I heard the same thing kind of echoed in what you said. And it sounds good and high-minded, and you know, we don't get into things, but things like this don't happen. Maduro stays. The Iran regime stays. The Fordo continues to enrich uranium. Isn't there any part of you that looks at what's happened and says, wow, this could end up being very good for the world, and it takes a lot of courage to do a lot of these things, no?
Joe, I hope so. Certainly that's the outcome I want. And as I said, as a military operation, as an intelligence matter, it was brilliant. But again, the question is, where does this go from here? If this leads to a genuine democratic transition in Venezuela, if Mrs. Machado or her party wind up being seated, that would be a tremendous outcome, and one that I would applaud and applaud the president for. But right now, we're in a moment where, again, we've had regime change without changing the regime. This is the old Who song, you know, here's the new boss, same as the old boss.
Same as the old boss.
So where does the administration go with that? That's what I want to see. And if they take this to a place where we see a transition to democracy, that would be a tremendous outcome.
Mr. Secretary, the other big hotspot right now is Iran. Protests escalating there. Curious what you think the reaction should be by the U.S. government.
Well, look, Andrew, anyone who tells you they know where Iran's going to go, I would listen to someone else, because the fact of the matter is, all we can say for certain is that this regime will endure until it doesn't. Now, what's new here, what's different, what's so powerful, is you have virtually all of Iranian society on the streets. This is an incredible cross-section of people. It's poor folks and the middle class. It's urban and rural. It's women. It's the labor movement. It's the merchants. That's very, very powerful. And it starts with the economy. It's the economy, stupid. You have 70% inflation for food, 50% across the board, huge youth unemployment. The currency's taken a dive against the dollar. People don't feel like they have a future. And then, of course, there is revulsion at the elites. There was one chant in the streets the other day. Their children are in Canada, you know, studying or improving their lives. Ours are in prison. So that's very powerful. And then the people have seen that the emperor has no clothes. When Iran attacked Israel, not once but twice, during our administration, and we helped Israel effectively repel and deal with that. And then when Israel took on Iran last June with the strong support of the Trump administration, that exposed the regime for what it is, which is hollow, and the loss of its proxies. All of that has made a powerful impression. And you have people also chanting in the streets that they're sick of Iran's foreign entanglements. It's, you know, no Hamas, no Gaza. I'm about Iran. But here is the challenge. You have a security force that continues, at least for the moment, to be united and to use the most violent, lethal means to put down these protests. How that plays out could go in any one of a number of directions. This could lead to an incredibly vicious crackdown. That's what we seem to be seeing right now. It could lead to some kind of change in regime, either the military taking over and pushing out the clerics, or something softer. It could lead to the Iranians reaching out, trying to cut a deal with us, and we've seen signs of that. It could lead, maybe, to democratic transition. You see a lot of people in the streets all rallying behind the the son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi, who's in exile, but seems to be a unifying figure. So this could play out in any one of a number of ways. Maybe this is the moment, but we've been there before.
I've only got about 30 seconds left, and I want to ask you about Greenland. It's important. Is there a way, was there ever discussion when you were there about either taking over Greenland, partnering with Greenland? It appears that the U.S. over the last 20 years has actually retreated largely from Greenland.
Andrew, the question really is why. We don't need to do this. You all know, and you've talked about it. In terms of our military position there, I visited our base there. We have an agreement dating back to 1951 that allows us to add more bases, add more personnel, add more equipment. So we don't need to take it over to do that. The minerals, the other wealth that's there, all we have to do is ask. They're very happy to do deals, trade and investment deals. We don't need to do an imperial deal to take over the place. So this would be a big mistake because we can get what we need and what we want by doing it cooperatively, not by taking over the place. It would obviously gut our relationship with one of our best allies, Denmark, that's been with us in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. Right. Ironically, among the best policies on immigration and on freedom of speech that this administration would admire. It would gut NATO, the strongest defensive alliance in history. So, you know, the question I come back to is why. We didn't contemplate that. And again, I hope the president is simply trying to maybe leverage some kind of deal. Look, if he's talking about buying Greenland, the problem is Denmark can't sell it. Greenland doesn't want to be sold. At least the politicians tell us that. Maybe he's thinking of some kind of hostile takeover where the government there is basically the board and the people are the shareholders, and if he offers them enough, they'll take it. But every poll tells us that's not what they want. So we can get what we want and what we need by just asking.